The wind howled across the frozen plains, biting and sharp, cutting through every layer of clothing as if the cold wanted to reach inside his very bones. The human, a man who had spent most of his life on this harsh planet, pulled his coat tighter and adjusted the strap of his pack. His cabin was still a short walk away, nestled among rocks and sparse snow-laden trees, but the path seemed endless in the blizzard. Snow swirled in the air, forming tiny spirals that stung his face. Yet even in this cruel weather, his focus remained steady. He was used to this. He had to be. Survival here demanded more than courage. It demanded vigilance, patience, and an understanding of the planet's unforgiving moods. As he trudged through the snow, his eyes caught a flicker of movement near a rocky ridge. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow dancing with the wind. But then he saw it clearly. A figure, small and trembling, huddled near a cluster of rocks. The man's heart skipped a beat. In all his years on this world, he had never seen another living being out here, especially not one so fragile, so lost. He moved closer, his boots crunching through the fresh snow, and saw her properly for the first time. The alien woman. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly in the fading light, a soft violet hue that reflected the snow around her. Tiny streaks of frost clung to her hair, and her tears, frozen into delicate crystals, on her cheeks made her look both beautiful and tragic. Her eyes, large and expressive, darted around, fearful, unsure. She shivered violently, wrapping her arms around herself in a futile attempt to keep warm. The man's first instinct was caution. He had heard stories of alien refugees from distant worlds, some kind, some dangerous. But seeing her like this, alone and defenseless, his hesitation melted into something else. Empathy. He took a deep breath and called out, his voice carrying over the whistling wind. "Hey, are you all right? Can you move?" The alien flinched and looked at him with wide, startled eyes. She didn't respond with words. He didn't expect her to, but her gaze held something deeper. Fear, yes, but also a faint spark of hope, as if she had been praying someone would come. He knelt down in the snow, careful not to startle her, and held out his gloved hand. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. Come with me. You'll be safe inside." For a long moment she hesitated. Her eyes flickered between his face and the cabin in the distance, as if she could sense that this human was genuine. Slowly she nodded, and he extended his arm closer. With a trembling step, she rose and took his hand. It was delicate, surprisingly, warm despite the cold, and he felt a strange connection, almost magnetic, as if the universe itself had pushed them together at this exact moment. The walk back to his cabin was slow. The alien woman moved carefully, her body still shivering uncontrollably. He kept his arm around her, guiding her through the deep snow. Every step seemed heavy, as though the ground wanted to keep her from moving. The wind was relentless, and snowflakes fell like tiny daggers, but she did not complain. Her lips were blue from the cold, and her eyes, though alert, seemed exhausted from fear and exposure. He couldn't stop glancing at her, worried that one wrong gust of wind or slip could send her into danger. Finally, the cabin came into view. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth, safety, and the faint smell of old wood and fire. The man opened the door, stepping aside to let her enter first. The heat hit her instantly, and she shivered less violently, though her body still trembled. She blinked, unaccustomed to such comfort, as if every sensation was new to her. He shut the door behind them, sealing out the storm, and watched as she cautiously approached the fire. He moved quickly to take off her frost-covered coat and scarf, setting them aside to dry. She didn't resist, allowing him to help, but her eyes never left his face. The alien woman was beautiful in a way humans had never seen, graceful and delicate, yet marked by the hardships of survival. Her features were sharp and elegant, with high cheekbones and small pointed ears peeking through her icy hair. Her eyes were large, almost too large for her face, reflecting both fear and intelligence. He felt a strange mix of wonder and protectiveness. She finally sat on a chair near the fire, curling her knees to her chest, The heat gradually reached her skin and she let out a small, shivering breath that sounded almost like a whisper. The man sat across from her, careful not to appear threatening, and set down a steaming cup of hot liquid in front of her. She looked at it curiously, then slowly sipped. Her hands were small and delicate, fingers shimmering faintly in the firelight. The warmth spread through her, and her shivers began to subside. "Do you understand me?" he asked gently, unsure if she could comprehend his words. She shook her head slightly, then pointed to her chest and tapped it, her eyes looking into his with urgency. He realized she was trying to communicate, to convey something without using language he could understand. "It's okay," he said softly. "We'll find a way to understand each other. For now, just rest." Hours passed. The storm outside raged, but inside the cabin a fragile sense of calm had settled. He built a small fire, added more wood, and sat quietly, watching her recover. She remained silent, but attentive, her large eyes scanning the cabin with curiosity and caution. She finally spoke, though the words were strange and musical, flowing in a language that was foreign to him. The sound was soft, almost like wind through glass, and he felt a strange calm wash over him just by hearing it. Despite the language barrier, they began to communicate in small ways. He offered her food, dried meat, bread, and a few preserved fruits, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite. He noticed how careful she was, as though every act of eating was a study of human customs. In return, she pointed to him and made small gestures, as if asking about his life. He smiled and shrugged, telling her simple things about the planet, the cabin, and his work. She seemed fascinated, leaning forward to study his expressions and reactions. Night fell, and the storm outside grew fiercer. The alien woman finally leaned back in her chair, exhaustion overtaking her. Her breathing was steady and the shivering had almost completely stopped. The man watched her closely. He knew the world was dangerous, and she was far from safe. But he also knew that for the first time in days she felt some measure of security. He realized that somehow he had become her protector. "I don't know what brought you here," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But you're safe now. I'll keep you safe." The alien woman tilted her head, studying him. Though she could not respond in words he understood, he felt that she recognized his sincerity. Her eyes glimmered with something like gratitude, or perhaps hope. It was a fragile bond, born of desperation and trust, but it was strong enough to hold in the face of the raging storm outside. Hours turned into a long, quiet night. The man stayed awake, keeping an eye on her as she slept in a blanket near the fire. Her breathing was even. Her body finally relaxed after the ordeal outside. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief, curiosity, and something he could not yet name. This encounter, unexpected and unplanned, had changed something inside him. He had always been alone on this frozen world, and yet here was someone else, someone extraordinary who had stumbled into his life. As the wind howled and snow battered the cabin walls, he allowed himself a moment to think. He had no idea who she truly was, what dangers she had escaped, or what challenges lay ahead. But one thing was certain: he would not turn his back. He had invited her into his cabin, and with that act, he had also opened the door to a journey neither of them could have predicted. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with warmth and light, and outside the storm raged on. Inside, a human and an alien shared the quiet space, an unspoken understanding forming between them. Each was wary, each unsure, but both were beginning to realize that survival, and perhaps something deeper, might depend on the other. The first part of their story had begun. Morning came slowly on the frozen planet, the sun struggling to pierce through the thick clouds of swirling snow. The cabin was warm and quiet, the fire from last night still casting a soft glow across the small room. The alien woman stirred first, blinking her large violet eyes against the dim light. She stretched, her movements cautious and fluid, as if every motion mattered and had to be precise. The man watched her quietly, unsure how to approach her without frightening her. She looked at him and spoke a few soft words in her strange, melodic language. The sounds rolled gently through the cabin like water moving over stones. The man shook his head slowly. He did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Her voice carried a question, a hint of curiosity and wariness. He smiled gently. "I don't understand you," he said softly. "But I will try. We can find a way." For the next few hours, they sat near the fire. He brought her a bowl of warm porridge, which she accepted with hesitation. Her fingers, long and delicate, traced the edges of the bowl as if it were something magical. She tasted it slowly, nodding slightly, and he smiled, relieved that she was eating. Hunger was one thing the cold could not forgive, and he knew she had not had a proper meal for days. Communication was slow, filled with gestures and pointing at objects in the cabin. He pointed to the fire and said, "Warm," moving his hands to show heat. She repeated the gesture, mimicking him, and a faint smile. The days that followed were quiet but filled with a subtle, unspoken tension. The alien woman, whom he still didn't know the name of, was settling into life inside the cabin, but there was something in the way she looked at the horizon that kept the man on edge. He had never felt so uncertain, even though she had brought an unexpected sense of purpose into his life. Every time she gazed out the window, her eyes darkened as if she were seeing something far beyond the icy landscape. It was a look that haunted him, a reminder that whatever brought her here was not over. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. The man would go outside to gather firewood and supplies, while the alien woman would carefully study the inside of the cabin. She took to it quickly, arranging things in neat piles, checking on the tools, and carefully handling everything as if she were analyzing them. The man couldn't help but smile at how she observed things. It was like watching a curious child, but with a depth of intelligence that he couldn't ignore. Her appearance was still striking, her violet skin almost glowing in the dim light of the cabin. Her long hair had finally dried and now cascaded down her back, catching the light with every movement. Despite her delicate form, there was a strength in her that he couldn't quite understand. Her movements were fluid and purposeful, and even in moments of stillness, there was a quiet intensity about her. One morning, he returned from a long trek in the snow, carrying a sack of supplies. When he entered the cabin, he saw the alien woman sitting by the window again, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains as if waiting for something. She turned to him when he entered but didn't say a word. Instead, she pointed to the sky with a slow, deliberate motion, then made a gesture as though something were flying overhead. Her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. He set the sack down and walked over to her, trying to catch her gaze. "What is it? What are you seeing?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. She looked at him for a long moment, as if considering how much to say. Finally, she pointed outside, again, then to herself, and mimicked a motion of flying with her hands. The man felt his stomach tighten. Whatever was coming, whatever had been following her, was closer now. Her fear was clear. She was no longer just a stranger in his cabin. She was someone with a past that was catching up to her. She reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out a small device, something he had never seen before. It was sleek and metallic with a series of glowing symbols along its surface. She handed it to him, her hands trembling slightly, and he took it carefully, unsure of what it was. "What's this?" he asked, turning the device over in his hands. She pointed to the glowing symbols, then to her chest and finally to the sky, as though trying to explain. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen, but he felt a sense of urgency growing. This wasn't just some alien trinket. This was something important. He took the device and held it up to the light, hoping to decipher some clue. The woman watched him closely, her large eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. It was as if she were relying on him to understand, to do something with this device that could change everything. But the man had no answers. He was just a survivor on a frozen planet, used to handling tools and fending off the cold. But this was beyond him. After a long moment of silence, he set the device down and looked at her. "I don't know what this is, but we'll figure it out. Together." He tried to give her a reassuring smile, but he knew deep down that the danger was already closing in. He couldn't protect her from whatever was coming, not unless he understood what it was and how to fight it. That night, after they ate their simple meal of stew and bread, the man sat by the fire, thinking. His mind kept returning to the alien woman's words, her gestures, her warnings. She was in danger, and by extension, so was he. But he couldn't just turn his back on her. He had brought her inside, offered her his shelter, and now they were connected in a way he couldn't explain. The storm outside had died down, leaving the world eerily still. The night was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the fire. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As the man sat there, staring into the flames, the alien woman joined him. She sat cross-legged near the fire, her eyes focused on him. She touched her chest again, then gestured toward the fire, as if trying to communicate something important. He looked at her, trying to understand. "You want to tell me something?" he asked softly. She nodded once, her eyes dark with emotion. Then she pointed to the stars outside the cabin and made the flying gesture again. He felt a chill run down his spine. "You think they're coming for you?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, her expression grim. The man felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know who they were, but he knew enough to understand that the alien woman had a past filled with dangers he couldn't even imagine. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, his voice firm. The words felt strange, unfamiliar to him. He wasn't the kind of person to make grand promises, but something about her made him want to protect her at all costs. She looked at him, and for the first time, a small, hopeful smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She reached out and placed her hand on his, a silent gesture of gratitude. They stayed that way for a while, sitting by the fire, the quiet filling the room. Outside, the stars glimmered faintly in the dark sky, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The alien woman looked at the sky one last time before standing up, her movements graceful despite the tension in the air. She motioned toward the door, then to the device on the table. The man understood. She wanted him to go outside, to figure out what was coming. He grabbed his coat, the weight of the task pressing down on him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had found a strange woman in the snow and taken her in. But now, he had to do more. He had to protect her no matter what it took. They stepped outside into the cold. The snow crunched under their feet, and the wind bit at their faces. The alien woman pointed to the sky again, this time more urgently. He followed her gaze, squinting into the darkness. There, on the horizon, he saw it. Small, fast-moving lights cutting through the night sky. The shape of something large, something menacing, was descending toward them. The man's heart pounded in his chest. "They're coming," he said, his voice tight with fear. The alien woman nodded, her expression serious. Without another word, they turned and hurried back inside the cabin. The man locked the door behind them, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what kind of enemy they were facing, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. And he knew deep down that whatever came next, it was only the beginning. The alien woman's past had finally caught up to her, and now it was his turn to stand by her. Together they would face whatever came next. They had no other choice. The wind howled outside, pushing snow against the walls of the cabin, but inside, the air was thick with tension. The alien woman stood near the window, her eyes focused on the sky where the lights had appeared earlier. The man paced back and forth, his mind racing. He had never faced anything like this before. He had lived his life in quiet solitude, far away from any kind of danger. Now it seemed danger was knocking on his door. He turned to her, his thoughts still swirling. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. The alien woman didn't answer right away. She stood there for a moment, staring out into the distance as if calculating her next move. Then, with a swift motion, she turned and walked toward him, her eyes intense but filled with something else too, determination. The man took a deep breath. "I won't let them take you," he said. He didn't know why he felt so sure about that. After all, they had just met, and he had no idea who these enemies were or how powerful they might be. But something in him couldn't let go of the feeling that he had to protect her. She nodded slowly, a faint smile on her lips. She walked over to the table and grabbed the small metallic device he had found earlier. With a careful motion, she pointed to it and then to her chest. "It's a communicator," the man said aloud, almost as if speaking to himself. She looked at him, her eyes locked on his, and nodded. She moved her fingers over the device, causing it to light up with a soft glow. The symbols on its surface flickered, and for a brief moment the man felt a strange sense of connection to the device, as if it were alive. She handed it to him, and he took it in his hands. He wasn't sure what it was supposed to do, but he could sense that it was important, maybe even their only hope of survival. He stared at it, trying to understand, but there were no clear instructions. The alien woman approached him again, her fingers gently brushing his. She pointed to the sky and then to the device. He understood then. She wanted him to send a message. She wanted him to reach out to whoever was listening on the other side. Taking a deep breath, he pressed a button on the device. It made a soft melodic sound as the symbols glowed brighter. "Can you hear me?" he asked, speaking into the small device. There was silence for a long moment, but then a crackling sound broke the quiet. A voice, low and unfamiliar, spoke through the static. "We hear you." The words were clear, though strange. The man's heart pounded in his chest. Who were these people? Were they here to help or to harm? The wind howled louder now, swirling the snow into thick clouds that covered the horizon. The man and the alien woman ran, their footsteps heavy in the thick snow, the distant roar of the descending ship growing louder with each passing second. Their hearts pounded, but neither of them slowed. The world around them seemed to shrink as the danger drew closer. The man held her hand tightly, knowing that the safety of the cabin was no longer an option. The alien woman's expression was focused, determined. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. She had placed her trust in him, and he was going to make sure she didn't regret it. They reached the small rocky outcrop, a natural barricade that could provide some cover. The man stopped for a moment, looking over at the alien woman. She nodded, understanding what needed to be done. He had no plan, no real idea of how to fight the enemies that were coming. But he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't just wait for them to arrive. They had to be ready. "Do you have any weapons?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She shook her head, her face serious. She was unarmed, but there was something in her demeanor, something fierce, that made him believe she could hold her own. "I'll figure it out," he said quickly. His mind was racing. The ship was coming down fast, and they needed to move fast if they had any chance of escaping or at least buying time. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Stay close to me. We'll have to move when it's right." The alien woman nodded, and together they crouched behind the rocks, watching the ship as it descended lower, the shape growing larger and clearer. The ship was sleek, silver, and unlike anything the man had ever seen. It seemed almost alive, its surface glinting in the light of the fading sun. It was designed for speed, for stealth. Whoever was on that ship was coming for a reason. The man could feel the tension in the air, the oppressive weight of the situation. The ship was now just above the treetops, hovering ominously, its engines humming low. The man's heart raced and his grip tightened around the small knife he had grabbed from the cabin. He wasn't a fighter. He had never been in a real fight. But the thought of losing the alien woman, of letting her down, made his resolve harden. Suddenly, the ship's doors opened and several figures began to descend on long, slender ropes. They moved swiftly with precision, landing on the snow with no sound. The man could barely make them out, but their movements were calculated, purposeful. He didn't know who they were, whether they were soldiers or hunters. But he knew they were not here to make peace. The alien woman stepped forward, her body tense, She looked at him with a silent plea in her eyes, asking for his help, but also showing that she was ready. She had no fear in her now. The man could see it. She wasn't just a frightened refugee anymore. She was a warrior, someone who had seen and experienced things far beyond his understanding. "You need to stay back," he whispered, his voice urgent. "They'll be after you, not me." She shook her head slowly, stepping closer. "We fight together," she said in her soft, melodic voice. The words were simple, but they held a weight, a finality. She wasn't asking for his permission. She was telling him they were in this together. The man didn't argue. He could see the fire in her eyes, and he knew that if he tried to keep her out of this, he'd lose her trust. They were already far beyond that point. He nodded, and together they crept forward, keeping to the shadows, their feet barely making a sound in the snow. The figures on the ground were moving toward the cabin now, their heavy boots sinking into the snow as they marched with military precision. The man's heart pounded in his chest. There were at least 6 of them, soldiers or mercenaries, he wasn't sure. They carried weapons that looked like they belonged to a highly advanced civilization, guns with strange glowing tips and energy shields that crackled with power. He had no idea how to fight them, but he wasn't going to let them take her. The alien woman's hand brushed against his arm, her eyes meeting his again. She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, then made a fist. It was a signal. He understood. She wasn't just ready to defend herself, she was going to fight for both of them. Suddenly, one of the figures turned. The man froze, his breath catching in his throat. The soldier's eyes scanned the area, his gaze passing over the outcrop where they were hiding. The man held his breath, praying that they hadn't been seen. For a heartbeat, it felt as if time itself had frozen. Then the soldier's attention shifted and he continued moving toward the cabin. The man let out a quiet exhale, his muscles relaxing just a little. The alien woman motioned for him to follow, and together they moved toward a small ravine in the distance. It was the only cover left before the open field where the soldiers were gathering. The man moved quickly, keeping his eyes on the soldiers, counting the steps it would take to get to safety. The alien woman moved like a shadow beside him, her movements precise and controlled. She wasn't just following him, she was taking the lead, guiding them through the snow with a confidence that made him feel more certain than he had ever felt. She was born for this. They reached the ravine and the man crouched behind a large rock, watching as the soldiers spread out around the cabin. His heart raced again. The alien woman was still at his side, her eyes scanning the soldiers, her expression unreadable. He couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of awe. Despite the danger, she was calm, steady, focused. "We need a distraction," the man whispered, turning to her. She nodded without hesitation, then moved toward the edge of the ravine. Without another word, she disappeared into the snow, moving with the speed of someone who had spent a lifetime evading enemies. The man waited, holding his breath, his heart pounding as he listened to the sounds of the soldiers approaching the cabin. He could hear them shouting orders, their voices distorted by the wind. His grip tightened around the small knife, but he didn't know what he would do with it. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a man trying to protect someone he cared about. Then it happened. A loud crash echoed across the snowy landscape, followed by a series of explosions. The man's eyes widened as the soldiers' attention snapped toward the noise. They looked in the direction of the blast, confusion spreading across their faces. The alien woman had caused the distraction, drawing their attention away from the cabin. The man moved quickly, not wasting a moment. He reached the cabin's outer wall and began to move inside, using the chaos outside as his cover. The alien woman had done her part. Now it was his turn. Inside the cabin, the soldiers were scrambling. They weren't prepared for what was happening. They had underestimated both him and the alien woman. The man moved swiftly, finding a small supply of firepower. He wasn't skilled, but he knew enough to use it. "Stay back," he muttered to himself as he prepared for what came next. They weren't just going to fight to survive. They were going to fight for their freedom. The world outside was chaos. The man's breath came in sharp, quick gasps as he crouched behind a stack of crates in the corner of the cabin, his fingers wrapped tightly around the weapon he had found. The soldiers outside were closing in, but the alien woman had given them the distraction they needed. The blast had created enough confusion to buy them some time, but it wouldn't last long. They had to move fast. He peeked through a crack in the cabin wall, watching as the soldiers began to regroup, their weapons aimed at the horizon, their voices filled with anger and determination. They had underestimated the alien woman's ability to fight back, and now they were paying the price. The man's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier. He had never fought a battle like this. He had spent most of his life alone on this frozen planet, hunting for food, surviving the harsh winters. But now, the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the alien woman's life, and he wouldn't let them take her. The sound of footsteps outside brought him back to the present. The soldiers were getting closer, and the man knew it wouldn't be long before they discovered him. He had to act fast. He glanced toward the alien woman, who was crouched in the shadows, watching the soldiers with calm, focused eyes. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the fire in her gaze. She was ready to fight. The man took a deep breath and made his decision. He stood up quickly, pulling the trigger on the weapon in his hand. A blast of energy shot out, striking one of the soldiers in the chest. The man watched as the soldier staggered back, his armor sparking before he crumpled to the ground. The remaining soldiers immediately turned toward the sound of the shot, their eyes scanning the cabin. The man ducked back behind the crates, his heart pounding in his chest. He had only managed to take down one of them, but it was enough to create confusion. The soldiers weren't expecting a fight from him, not a human, not someone who had no training. They were too focused on the alien woman, and that was his advantage. The alien woman moved with speed and grace, slipping out from her hiding place and into the shadows of the cabin. She was a ghost, moving silently, her eyes never leaving the soldiers. Her movements were fluid and precise, her body honed for survival. The man couldn't help but watch in awe as she prepared for the next move. She was the one who was truly dangerous here, not him. But together, they made a powerful team. The man wasn't sure how long they could